Today we are going to look at inverse functions. So an inverse function reverses the effect of a function. So if we had a function f of x, we would denote the inverse function as f to the negative 1 of x. Now we've spoken about this before. In numbers, this to the negative 1 means the reciprocal. That is not what it means in function notation. This power of negative 1 means inverse. In fact, with numbers, the power of negative 1 does actually mean inverse. It means the multiplicative inverse. If you multiply 3 with its inverse, you'll get 1. So 3 to the negative 1 in numbers would be 1 over 3. But f to the negative 1 of x is not 1 over f of x. That is not what it means. What it means is whatever's happened in f of x, f inverse of x reverses that. So we're going to have a look at an example. So if we had f of x equals 7x plus 1 over 2, we want to find f inverse of x. The first thing we're going to do is, the only reason for doing this is to make it easier to work with. We're going to rename f of x as y. The only reason for that is to make it easier when we start multiplying up. I'm going to show you what I mean. To find the inverse of this function, I need to rearrange it to make x the subject. So I'm going to turn it into y equals 7x plus 1 over 2, and I'm going to rearrange that to make x the subject. The reason for changing this is just to make it a bit simpler, because if I start doing things like this, I'm going to try and make x the subject. So I'm going to say 2fx equals 7x plus 1. It's not over anything anymore. This starts to get a bit confusing because this 2 is a multiplier, but this f is not multiplying x. This f of x is only one term in itself. So this is an f multiplied by x. And if we leave it as f of x and we start messing around with it, it's going to get a little bit confusing. So that is why we're going to change this into y. Then I'm going to rearrange to make x the subject. So first I'll multiply by 2. Then I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. And then I'm going to divide by 7. So I've made x the subject. I've got that x equals 2y minus 1 over 7. Now, this is not a function of x. This is the inverse function because we have reversed it. So it is an inverse function, but it's in terms of y. It's not in terms of x. So this would be f inverse of y, but that's not what we want. We want f inverse of x. So all we do is wherever there was y in the brackets, we now put x in the brackets. You can also think of it as just skipping this step. Turn x into f inverse of x, turn y into x. So this was our original function, which was actually f of x. And if we call that y, make x the subject, and then relabel, we have f inverse of x is 2x minus 1 over 7. This function reverses this function. So what do I mean when I say that this function reverses this function? I'm going to pick a number and I'm going to put it through here. So I'm going to do f of 3. F of 3 is going to be 7 times 3 plus 1 over 2, which is 21 plus 1 over 2, which is 11. So if I put 3 in here, I get 11. Reversing what this function has done means that I put the output into the inverse function. So f inverse of 11 should take me back to 3 because it should reverse all of this. So I'm going to have 2 times 11 minus 1 over 7. That will give me 22 minus 1, so 21 over 7, which is 3, which is what we started off with. So the inverse function has reversed what the original function has done. Rearranging the function is the best way of finding the inverse function, but we can use what is called a function machine. I don't like these. I would prefer that you rearranged, but if you want to use this, you can. So if I write f of x out as a function machine, we start with x, we multiply x by 7. So we then have 7x. We add 1 to it. So we then have 7x plus 1, and then we divide it by 2, which gives us 7x plus 1 over 2. So that is the function machine for our original function. To get the function, the inverse function, we reverse the function machine, and we're going to put x in at this end. Instead of dividing by 2, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to times by 2. So we've now got 2x. Then instead of adding 1, we're going to subtract 1. So we've now got 2x minus 1. And then instead of timesing by 7, we're going to divide by 7. I need to stop saying timesing instead of multiplying, don't I? So then we will have 2x minus 1 over 7. And that tells us that f inverse of x is 2x minus 1 over 7. So that is how you would use a function machine. This is our second example. So f of x equals the square root of 4x minus 1. So all of that is under the square root, and then over 3. The 3 is not inside the square root. So I am going to start by relabeling that f of x as y. I want to find its inverse function. So f of x is this, and I want to find the inverse function. So I'm going to rearrange to make x the subject. So first I'll multiply by 3. Then I need to square both sides. If I square both sides, this side I square the whole thing. So it's going to be 3y all squared, which is 9y squared. This side I'm going to square the whole thing, which will just get rid of the square root, and I'll have 4x minus 1. Add 1 to both sides. And then finally divide by 4. So x equals 9y squared plus 1 over 4. However, like before, that is a function in y. So we've got that x equals 9y squared plus 1 over 4. What I need to do now is relabel them. I'm going to call x y, and I'm going to call y x. So now my function is in terms of x. So I can say that f inverse of x is 9x squared plus 1 over 4. If you like the function machine method better, we can use that here as well. So this function takes x and it multiplies, there we go, by 4. It then subtracts 1. It then square roots, and then it divides by 3. So to reverse that, we start with x here. We're going to multiply by 3. We're then going to do the reverse of square rooting, so we're going to square it. We're then going to do the reverse of subtracting 1. We're going to add 1. And this 3x all squared is going to be 9x squared. And then instead of multiplying by 4, we're going to divide by 4. So we end up with 9x squared plus 1 over 4. So f inverse of x is 9x squared plus 1 over 4. So for finding an inverse function, you've seen the rearranging method and you have seen the function machine method. Either method is fine. That should now give you enough information to do all of the questions that I've set. So please have a go at all of them and message me on Show My Homework if you need any help, and I will record a video showing you how to do them.